I came home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital to find my key wouldn't work. My sister had changed the locks on the house we'd shared for 20 years. I stood there in my scrubs, exhausted, thinking this had to be some kind of mistake. When I found out the real reason she locked me out, I realized I'd been living with a stranger my entire adult life. It was 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. I remember because it was the kind of cold that makes your fingers stiff. And I was fumbling with my keys outside 1247 Birchwood Lane, the pale green house with the white shutters and the garden gnome that had been home since I was 14 years old. The key went in like always, but it wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe the lock was just being stubborn like it sometimes got in the cold weather. Nothing. I pulled the key out. Checked it, same house key I'd used for 2 decades. Attached to the little stethoscope keychain my sister Delilah had given me when I graduated nursing school. That's when I noticed the lock itself looked different, shinier, newer. My stomach dropped in that specific way it does when you realize something is very, very wrong. But your brain hasn't caught up yet. I tried the back door, different lock. There too. I stood in our backyard, well, what I thought was still our backyard, still in my navy blue scrubs, holding my work bag, trying to make sense of what was happening. 20 years. I thought, 20 years of splitting utilities, sharing groceries, taking turns mowing the lawn. 20 years of living with my sister in the house our grandmother Estelle left us both. And now I was locked out like some stranger. My name is Carmen, and I'm 32 years old. I've been a registered nurse at Riverside General Hospital in Millbrook for 8 years now. I work the day shift in the cardiac unit, which means I'm usually out of the house by 6 a.m. and don't get back until well after 7 p.m. It's exhausting work. But it pays well, and it's always felt meaningful. Helping people, making a difference when they're at their most vulnerable. The house on Birchwood Lane has been in our family for 3 generations. Our great-grandmother bought it in 1952 when she moved to Millbrook from Tennessee. It's a modest 2-story colonial with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a kitchen that still has the original 1960s cabinets that Delilah always talked about renovating but never quite got around to. The living room has these big bay windows that face east, so you get beautiful morning light, and there's a screened-in porch on the back where we used to eat dinner during the summer. When our grandmother Estelle died 6 years ago, she left the house to both of us equally, 50-50 ownership, spelled out clearly in her will. It made sense. Delilah and I had both been living there since we were teenagers, after our parents died in a car accident when I was 14 and she was 16. Grandmother Estelle took us in without question, and we'd been a family unit ever since. Well, we were until that Tuesday evening in October. I stood there on the front porch, the porch light casting long shadows across the weathered boards, and tried to think rationally. Maybe there was some explanation. Maybe there had been a break-in and Delilah had changed the locks for security reasons. Maybe she'd tried to call me at work and I'd missed it. The cardiac unit gets pretty hectic, especially during code blues, and I don't always check my phone. I pulled out my cell phone and called her, straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said after the beep. "I'm locked out. Did something happen? Did you change the locks? Call me back." I tried the doorbell. No answer. Her car wasn't in the driveway. But that didn't necessarily mean anything. She worked as a freelance graphic designer and kept irregular hours. Sometimes she'd work late at coffee shops or meet clients for dinner. I walked around the house, checking all the windows on the first floor. Everything was locked tight. Through the living room window, I could see that the furniture was still there. The navy blue sectional sofa we'd bought together 3 years ago, the coffee table Delilah had refinished herself, the bookshelf stuffed with my nursing textbooks, and her art books. Everything looked normal, except for the fact that I couldn't get inside. The rational part of my brain kept offering explanations: emergency lock change, security upgrade. Maybe she'd lost her keys and had to get new locks, and she was planning to give me a new key when I got home. But there was another part of my brain, a quieter part, that was starting to whisper that something else was going on. I sat down on the front porch steps, still in my scrubs, and really looked at the house for the first time in a while. When you live somewhere for 20 years, you stop seeing it clearly. It becomes background, familiar to the point of invisibility. But sitting there locked out, I was seeing it with fresh eyes. The lawn was perfectly maintained, too perfectly. Delilah had always been casual about yard work, but the grass was recently cut in precise diagonal stripes. And the flower beds along the front walkway were weeded and mulched with professional precision. There were new plants, 2 expensive-looking shrubs and perennials that I didn't remember her mentioning. The front door had a new welcome mat. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple brown core mat with welcome in script letters, but it wasn't the mat we'd had before. The old one had been there for years, faded and fraying around the edges, with a design of sunflowers that had long since worn away to barely visible outlines, small things. Details that might not mean anything or might mean everything. I tried calling Delilah again, voicemail again. By now it was almost 8 p.m., and I was getting cold. October in Ohio means the temperature drops fast once the sun goes down, and my scrubs weren't exactly designed for sitting outside. I considered my options. I could drive to the 24-hour diner on Route 47 and wait there until Delilah came home. I could go to my friend Jessica's apartment across town and crash on her couch. I could check into a motel. But this was my house, my home, the place where I'd lived through high school, where I'd studied for my nursing boards, where I'd recovered from my appendectomy last year while Delilah brought me soup and trashy magazines. The place where I paid half the mortgage every month, where my name was on the deed alongside hers. I wasn't going anywhere. I walked back to my car and got my emergency kit from the trunk. As a nurse, you learn to be prepared for anything. I always kept a bag with a change of clothes, some snacks, a blanket, and basic toiletries. I also had a small flashlight and, somewhat ironically, a first aid kit. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and settled in on the porch swing to wait. While I waited, I started thinking about the last few months. Had there been signs I'd missed, changes in Delilah's behavior that might have pointed to something like this? Actually, yes. Now that I was really thinking about it, there had been changes. She'd been more secretive about her work lately. Delilah had always been a little scattered about her freelance projects. She'd work on 3 different websites at once, or spend all night designing a logo and then decide she hated it in the morning. But recently, she'd been more focused. She'd close her laptop when I walked into the room, or take phone calls out on the back porch where I couldn't hear. She'd also been dressing differently. Delilah had always been the artsy one, flowing skirts, vintage band t-shirts, jewelry she'd made herself from beads and wire. But in the past few months, she'd started wearing more professional clothes, blazers, tailored pants, shoes with actual heels. When I'd commented on it, she'd shrugged and said she was trying to look more professional for client meetings. And there had been the money thing. 3 months ago, Delilah had casually mentioned that she wanted to refinance the house. Interest rates were better now, she said, and we could probably get a lower monthly payment. She'd handled all the paperwork. I was working so many overtime shifts that I barely had time to sleep, let alone deal with mortgage documents. I'd signed where she told me to sign and assumed everything was fine. But what if it hadn't been? About refinancing at all, my phone buzzed. A text message from Delilah, "Staying at Trevor's tonight, we'll talk tomorrow." Trevor. I didn't know any Trevor. In the 2 years since Delilah's last serious relationship had ended, she'd been pretty open about her dating life. She'd mention guys she met on apps, complain about bad first dates, celebrate when someone took her somewhere nicer than Applebee's, but she'd never mentioned anyone named Trevor. I texted back, "Why are the locks changed? I can't get in the house." No response. I called her, voicemail. By 9 p.m., I was getting angry. Not just frustrated or confused, genuinely angry. Whatever was going on, leaving me locked out of my own house without explanation was cruel. We were sisters, we were family, we'd been through everything together, losing our parents, grandmother Estelle's long illness and death, my struggles in nursing school, her struggles to build her design business. We didn't do this to each other. Except apparently, we did. I tried Jessica's number. She answered on the second ring. "Carmen, what's up? You sound weird." I'm locked out of my house, I said. Delilah changed the locks and won't answer her phone. There was a pause. That's weird. Did you guys have a fight or something? No. Nothing. I went to work this morning, everything was normal. I came home, and the locks are different. Where are you now? Sitting on my front porch like some kind of homeless person. Come over, Jessica said immediately. I'll make coffee and we'll figure this out. I almost said yes. It would have been the easy thing to do, go to Jessica's, spend the night on her couch. Hope that everything would make sense in the morning. But something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the beginning of real understanding that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. Thanks, I said. But I think I need to stay here. I need to see this through, Carmen. It's getting cold and dark. I know, but this is my house, Jess. My name is on the deed. I pay half the mortgage. Whatever's going on, I'm not running away from it. After I hung up, I sat in the porch swing and tried to make sense of what I knew. Delilah had changed the locks. She wasn't answering her phone. She was staying at some guy Trevor's house. A guy I'd never heard of. The yard looked professionally maintained. There was new outdoor furniture I didn't remember buying. And then I remembered something else. 2 weeks ago, I'd come home to find Delilah in the kitchen with a woman I didn't recognize. They'd been sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out between them, and both of them had looked up when I walked in with expressions I couldn't quite read. Surprised, maybe, or guilty. Carmen, Delilah had said, a little too brightly. This is Patricia Morrison. She's helping me with some business stuff. Patricia Morrison had been wearing a navy blue suit and had the kind of perfectly styled blonde hair that comes from expensive salons. She'd stood up and shaken my hand with a firm grip and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nice to meet you, she'd said. Delilah's told me so much about you. I'd made polite conversation for a few minutes, but I'd been exhausted from a particularly rough shift, and I'd excused myself to go shower and change. When I'd come back downstairs, Patricia Morrison was gone, and Delilah was loading dishes into the dishwasher with unusual efficiency. What kind of business stuff? I'd asked. Oh, just boring financial planning stuff, Delilah had said without looking at me. She's helping me organize my freelance income for tax purposes. I'd accepted that explanation because why wouldn't I? Delilah was always disorganized about money. And it made sense that she might hire someone to help her get her finances in order. But now, sitting on the porch in the dark, I was wondering if Patricia Morrison had been something else entirely. Like a real estate agent. The thought hit me like a physical blow. What if Delilah was trying to sell the house? What if all of this, the refinancing paperwork, the new locks, the mysterious Trevor, the perfectly manicured yard, was part of some plan to sell our grandmother's house without telling me? But that was impossible. My name was on the deed. She couldn't sell without my signature, could she? I pulled out my phone and did something I probably should have done months ago when she first mentioned refinancing. I Googled how to check property ownership records Ohio and found the website for the Millbrook County Auditor's Office. Public records, searchable online. I typed in our address, 1247 Birchwood Lane. The page loaded slowly on my phone, and, for a moment I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Then the information came into focus, and I understood exactly why I was locked out of my own house, according to the county records. The property at 1247 Birchwood Lane was owned by one person, Delilah Marie Rodriguez. My name was nowhere on the deed. I stared at the screen until the words started to blur. This had to be wrong. There had to be some mistake in the system, or maybe the website wasn't updated. Or maybe I was looking at the wrong property. But I wasn't. The address was right. The property description matched our house exactly. And there was Delilah's name, listed as the sole owner as of 3 months ago, right around the time she'd mentioned refinancing. 3 months ago. When I'd signed papers I'd barely read because I'd trusted my sister to handle the details. Papers that, apparently, hadn't been about refinancing at all. I sat there on the porch swing, wrapped in my emergency blanket, staring at my phone screen, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something colder and more permanent. The recognition that everything I'd believed about my life, about my family, about my home, had been built on lies. Delilah hadn't just changed the locks, she'd stolen my house. And I'd helped her do it by signing whatever papers she'd put in front of me, trusting her completely because she was my sister, and sisters don't betray each other like this. Except they do. 20 years. 20 years of shared meals and shared bills and shared memories. 20 years of being a family, or what I'd thought was a family. 20 years of me working overtime to pay my half of the mortgage on a house that, apparently, hadn't been mine for months. My phone rang. Delilah. I almost didn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail and continued sitting there in the dark, processing the magnitude of what she'd done. But I needed to hear her voice. I needed to understand how she could do this to me. "Hello," I said. "Carmen." Her voice was different, not the casual, slightly scattered tone I was used to. This was more controlled, more careful. "I got your texts." "Good. Then you know I can't get in the house." "Care to explain why?" A pause. "We need to talk, but not over the phone." "Can you meet me somewhere? I'm sitting on the porch of what I thought was my house." "Delilah, if you want to talk, come home." That's actually what I need to talk to you about." "I can't come there right now." "Why not?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because it's not your house anymore, Carmen. And it's not really mine either. Not anymore." The words hit me like ice water. "What does that mean?" "I sold it. The sale went through yesterday. The new owners are moving in this weekend." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just said. "Carmen, are you there? You sold our house." My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "You sold our grandmother's house." I had to. "You don't understand the situation I'm in." "Then explain it to me, not over the phone." "Meet me at Penny's Diner on Route 47. We can talk there." "No." The word came out harder than I'd intended. "No, I'm not meeting you at some diner like. We're strangers. You want to talk, you come here, you explain to me how you sold a house that belonged to both of us without my knowledge." "Carmen, please, it's complicated." "I'm sure it is. You know what's not complicated? The fact that I've been paying half the mortgage on this house for years. The fact that Grandmother Estelle left it to both of us. The fact that you committed fraud." "It's not fraud." Her voice was sharp now, defensive. "I had power of attorney. All the papers you signed were legal." Power of attorney. I'd signed papers giving her power of attorney when? Why would I have done that? And then I remembered. Last year, when I'd had my appendectomy, I'd been in the hospital for 3 days, and there had been some issue with the insurance company needing authorization for something. Delilah had brought me papers to sign so she could handle it while I was recovering. At least, that's what she'd told me they were for. "You used a medical power of attorney to steal my house." "I didn't steal anything. I saved us both from losing everything." "Losing everything to what?" Silence on the other end of the line. "Delilah. Losing everything to what?" "I can't explain this over the phone. Please, just meet me at the diner." "No. Tell me now, or I'm hanging up and calling the police." A long pause. Then, "I owed money. A lot of money. To people who don't accept payment plans." And there it was. The beginning of the truth. 3 hours earlier, at 4:30 p.m., I'd been finishing my shift at Riverside General Hospital, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire life was about to implode. It had been a typical Tuesday in the cardiac unit, busy but manageable. Mrs. Henderson in room 314 was recovering well from her bypass surgery. And Mr. Young in 318 was finally stable after yesterday's heart attack scare. I remember feeling good that day, accomplished. We'd had a successful morning with a complicated procedure. And Dr. Williams had specifically thanked me for my quick thinking during a minor emergency. These were the moments that reminded me why I'd become a nurse. The satisfaction of knowing your skills and attention to detail had genuinely helped someone heal. The cardiac unit at Riverside General had been my professional home for 8 years. I knew every monitor beep, every medication protocol, every quirk of the ancient IV pumps that the hospital administration kept promising to replace. I'd worked with the same team of nurses for so long that we communicated in glances and half sentences. We were efficient, competent, and genuinely cared about our patients. My colleagues often joked that I was the most stable person they knew. Carmen never has drama, they'd say. Carmen has her life figured out, and I did, or at least I thought I did. I had a career I loved, a house I'd inherited and maintained, a sister who was my closest friend, and enough savings to feel secure. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable. I planned ahead, paid my bills on time, and slept well at night knowing I'd built a solid, predictable life. That Tuesday had started like every other Tuesday for the past 8 years. My alarm went off at 5:15 a.m., and I'd gotten up, showered, and dressed in fresh scrubs, navy blue ones that day, which I'd always thought looked more professional than the cartoon-printed ones some of the younger nurses wore. I'd grabbed coffee and a banana from the kitchen, where Delilah was already up, sitting at the table with her laptop and a steaming mug of the fancy dark roast she special ordered online. "Morning," she'd said without looking up from her screen. "How's your day looking?" "Pretty normal. Mrs. Henderson should be moving to step down today if everything goes well. Client call at 9, then working on that brewery website redesign. Nothing too exciting." It was the kind of mundane, comfortable exchange we'd had thousands of times over the years. Sisters who lived together, worked different schedules, but checked in with each other out of habit and genuine care. There had been nothing in her voice, nothing in her expression, that suggested she'd already made the decision to lock me out of our home that very day. I'd kissed her forehead as I headed out, another habit from our teenage years that had somehow persisted into our 30s. "See you tonight," I'd said. "See you tonight," she'd replied. The drive to Riverside General took exactly 18 minutes. From our house on Birchwood Lane, I'd timed it so many times over the years that I could predict, almost to the minute, when I'd pull into the hospital parking garage. The familiarity was comforting. Even during Ohio's unpredictable weather, even when construction projects rerouted traffic, even when I was running late, that 18-minute drive was a constant. Millbrook was the kind of mid-sized city where everyone eventually knew everyone, at least by sight. The hospital served not just our city but 3 surrounding counties, so I'd treated farmers from rural areas, executives from the small tech companies that had sprouted up near the university, and families who'd lived in Millbrook for generations. I'd grown up here, gone to Millbrook High School, and had never seriously considered living anywhere else. This was home. The house on Birchwood Lane was more than just where I lived. It was my connection to 3 generations of women who'd built lives in this community. My great-grandmother had been one of the first black nurses hired at Riverside General back in 1967. My grandmother Estelle had worked in the hospital's administrative offices for 35 years. And I'd continued the tradition, building my career in the same halls where my family had worked for decades. The house itself told the story of our family's progression. Great-grandmother had bought it as a young widow with 2 children, scraping together a down payment from her nursing salary when houses in decent neighborhoods were still accessible to working-class families. She'd planted the oak tree in the front yard that now shaded most of the property. She'd installed the hardwood floors that Delilah and I had refinished together 3 years ago. Grandmother Estelle had inherited the house and raised her own children there, including our mother, Rebecca. The kitchen still had the spice rack Estelle had mounted in 1978, organized exactly as she'd left it, with little handwritten labels in her careful cursive. The back porch had been her project in the 1980s. She'd saved up for 2 years to enclose it and turn it into a 3-season room where she grew African violets and read her romance novels. When our parents died in the car accident, Estelle hadn't hesitated to take into grieving teenagers. She'd converted the small den into a bedroom for Delilah, gave me the larger upstairs bedroom that had been our mother's, and somehow made space for 2 more people without ever making us feel like burdens. She'd helped me with my college applications, driven me to nursing school interviews, and celebrated every small milestone in our educations and careers. The morning she died, 6 years ago, I'd been working a night shift at the hospital. Delilah had called me at 6 a.m. with the news that Estelle had passed peacefully in her sleep. I'd rushed home still in my scrubs, and we'd held each other in the kitchen, crying and remembering the woman who'd saved us both. Reading her will had been emotional, but not surprising. She'd left the house to both of us equally, along with a letter explaining that she hoped we'd always take care of each other the way she'd taken care of our mother and we'd all taken care of each other. This house has been home to strong women for 3 generations, she'd written. I trust you both to honor that legacy. And we had, or I thought we had. Delilah and I had settled into a comfortable routine of shared domestic responsibilities. I handled most of the financial logistics, paying bills, dealing with insurance, scheduling maintenance, because my nursing schedule was more predictable than her freelance work. She handled most of the creative decisions, paint colors, furniture arrangements, garden planning, because she had the artistic eye and I genuinely didn't care as long as everything was functional. We split the mortgage payments exactly in half, even though I probably could have afforded more, and there were months when Delilah's client payments were irregular, but the house belonged to both of us equally. So equal contributions felt right. We split utilities, groceries, and major household expenses the same way. It was fair, practical, and it worked, or at least, I thought it worked. Looking back now, I could see signs that Delilah had been struggling financially, but they'd seemed like temporary setbacks rather than serious problems. A few months of late contributions to the mortgage, complaints about clients who paid slowly, or not at all, the occasional request to spot her for groceries or utilities with promises to pay me back the following week. But these weren't red flags to me, they were just the normal ups and downs of freelance work. I covered for her because that's what family does. When someone you love is struggling, you help them. When someone is temporarily short on money, you bridge the gap if you can afford to. I never questioned whether she was being honest about her financial situation because why would she lie to me? I'd trusted her completely, with my money, with my signature on legal documents, with decisions about our shared home. I'd trusted her the way you trust family, unconsciously, automatically. Without reservation. That trust had been my biggest mistake. As I'd driven to work that Tuesday morning, listening to the radio and mentally preparing for my shift, I'd had no idea that by the end of the day, I'd discover that trust had been systematically exploited and betrayed. I'd had no idea that the comfortable, predictable life I'd built was about to be revealed as an illusion. If I'd known what was waiting for me when I got home that evening, I probably would have called in sick, driven straight to the bank, and spent the day trying to protect whatever assets I could, but I didn't know. I went to work, took care of my patients, and looked forward to coming home to the house that had been in my family for 7 years, the house that, apparently, was no longer mine.